Hello, everyone.
No, Vinith is.
Hello, everyone. Very good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending upon where you're dialing in. I'm Vinit Salaju, General Secretary, Medical Affairs Society, or so-called MAS. A warm welcome and thank you so much for joining this remarkable webinar, Transformation in Medical Affairs Driving Change Management. A brief introduction about Medical Affairs Society. Medical Affairs Society is a non-profit organization which was established in 2020 under Indian Society Registration Act for fostering the growth of medical affairs in India. MEA is representing the Association of Medical Affairs Professionals in India for promoting excellence in the profession by professional development, networking, and advocacy. This is only and a first society dedicated for medical affairs professionals in India, with a reach to nearly 1,000 plus medical affairs professionals in India. If you are aspiring medical affairs professional or a medical affairs leader, if you want to join with us, request everybody to visit www.medicalaffairsociety.org to access interesting resources and to be part of the great networking chances. Without further ado, let me take a chance to introduce our moderator and panelists for this interesting session. All three are exceptional leaders who have the passion to make the difference in the field of medical affairs. And I really, personally, I always enjoy listening to these people as always. Let me start introducing Dr. Bhavesh, our very own president of Medical Affairs Society. He's currently working as a medical affairs vice president at Dr. Reddy's. He has a nearly 3 decades of experience as orthopedic surgeon and medical affairs leader. He has worked in various organizations in the country and above country leadership roles, like companies like GSK, AstraZeneca, and currently with Dr. Reddy's. Our panelist for today's discussion is Dr. Santosh. He's a trained physician with nearly 2 decades of experience in the corporate, worked in various leadership roles at Torrent, BMS, Alcon, and currently working as a head of medical affairs oncology at Takeda, based out of Singapore. Our next panelist is Dr. Mayur Joshi. He is a senior pharmaceutical physician with a 17 plus years of experience in the hospital and biopharmaceutical industry. He's a UK NHS physician and went on to hold several leadership roles in companies like Baxter, Biogen, and currently working as a global head of medical affairs at Novartis, based out of Switzerland. He's also additionally the founder and coaching and a strategic advisor services company called Joshi Life Sciences. It's wonderful to have all three dynamic people with us today. Let me hand over to Dr. Bhavesh to start this insightful discussion. Over to you.
Thank you, Vinay. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for setting the whole thing up and being the driver behind this whole initiative. Also, I would like to thank, before we start off, Santosh, as we start off, Santosh and Mayur for being a part of this initiative. So it has passion talking about medical affairs and taking part in capability uplift to today, from internal to external stakeholders. All that has changed a lot. So without sort of further ado on what are the changes, and I'll not go into details because that's why we have the panelists for, and I'll be adding to the discussion wherever I can. I'll move on to Santosh first. So Santosh, right, we're talking about transformation in medical affairs, and you just spoke about a meeting going on, which is being chaired by Ajay Tiku in Singapore. It's the hot topic these days, and there are a few points that I touched upon. If you look at this transformation, I mean, we were doing this pace and so drastically from where it was before.
Thanks, Bhavesh. We hear and getting threatened again and again to patent erosion. Patent, expiry is leading to revenue erosion. We thought in the early 2010, when it all started with the Clavix and the esomeprazole patent loss, that this is kind of one time of phenomena, but it is not. It's a going on phenomena, and every year on year basis, practically we lose 10 to 15 billion dollars. So that's one part of the story where MNCs are reducing, are struggling with their revenues. At the second side, what we are seeing is the R&D investment is increasing year on year. You pick up the annual report of any top 20 pharma companies in the world, and you will see that the R&D investment is increasing at a CAGR of 2.3 to 2.5. What is happening? So what is happening that these drugs, the success for the drugs has been pretty much almost stable. But in the last 5 years, we did see on an average in a year, which to his last 2 decades, we have seen that the number of products coming to the market is around in the range of 70 to 75 new molecular entities worldwide. Whereas earlier in 2005, 2010, 2015, and until 2017, it used to be 35. So if you look at this number has increased, but it hasn't increased in terms of the ratio, because the number of products in the pipeline and as a new molecular entity in preclinical is phenomenally higher than what it used to be. So the percentage wise have been same. Now, where is pharmaceutical companies finding solace? Pharmaceutical companies are finding solace in complex molecules because there is a high success of molecules to get successful and approved in the market. So you see a trend increasing with rare diseases coming in picture, where the chances of success for a product to see the light of the day is much higher than of the other molecules. And within the rare diseases, another is the oncology space. So complex molecules coming in. So long story short, the R&D has completely shifted. We are not anymore dealing with simple mechanistic aspects of small molecules. We are dealing with highly complex molecules, which has got immunogenic interfaces in the body. And that actually warrants a rich understanding of science right at the development stage, right at the regulatory submission stage, right at the launch phase, and also at the post-launch phase. So in the interest of time, it's a big topic. Love to connect later also and talk about it, but I'll just leave it like that and let's see what Mayur has his thoughts on.
So, interesting point you make, Santosh. And I saw Mayur was sort of vigorously nodding. He was almost in violent agreement with what you were saying. And Mayur, that's a phrase that I picked up when I was working on the NHS, like you were, when I was back in the UK many years ago. But I don't want to stress on the many years because then it gives away my age. But moving on to another point, Santosh, just a counterpoint before I move to Mayur. While I agree with you that the world of complex molecules, large molecules, biologics, whichever way you call them, targeted therapies, immunotherapy, requiring an understanding of complex science, embedding that in the external sort of universe is one reason why transformation is taking place. But if you see, and if I speak about my own story, I'm now working in a branded generic firm. We have a lot of partnerships, and I'm not here to tom that fact. But even for the branded generic world, when I say my role, I mean medical affairs. The role that medical affairs had, say 15, 20, 25 years ago, I said reactive function, a few smattering of a few medics, 4 or 5 in a corner, approached by someone from the commercial side, a slide deck, please, or train my people, or give me a monograph for a drug which is going to be launched in the branded generic world. I'm very clear. Today, even in the branded generic world, talking about strategic partnership, being the lead people who get the insights into the organization. So that also has changed. I do buy your point that there is a huge change. So that gives me a nice segue to move on to Mayur. And Mayur, you've been in sort of roles, both country and global medical roles, and you've done sort of various pieces of interesting work. I mean, there are multiple things you think of when, I touched upon a few things in the context setting. So what would you define as medical transformation from where you see it and what you've experienced so far?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think you can look up kind of maybe a dictionary definition of what a transformation is, but ultimately it comes down to the objective. What are you trying to achieve, right? And I think what we're seeing more now, I think we've seen a very major shift. We've talked a little bit about the shift from a reactive supportive function to a more strategic driver in the organization. And now we're seeing more of an evolution of that. So it comes down to how the organization as a whole is looking to evolve. So you touched on a few points with regards to let's say specialty medicines or advanced therapeutics and advanced platforms. Those kinds of things require a lot more than a simple sales message, which is maybe back in the day, you would get marketing authorization. That would be enough to get a big sales launch. Then it was the health technology assessments. Once you got reimbursement, again, another big sales launch. But now you have to sort of pull all of that together and think about actual implementation in the clinic, which is where medical affairs is kind of quite nicely positioned. If you can build an organization and evolve an organization where they span and straddle the development side of things, looking at not just registration, but following on to reimbursement and access, and then finally actual implementation in the clinic. We all know that you can have access and reimbursement. Doesn't necessarily mean the drug is going to be available at the point of care for a physician to prescribe. So when you start to think about all of these aspects and the complexities of patient pathways and all of these things that we have to go through, medical affairs is best positioned for this. So it really requires leadership within an organization to sort of recognize that and say, actually, look, we've got medical people working in phase 2. They're inputting into clinical trial design that allows not just registration and access, but also implementation in the clinic. And then they straddle all the way through to launch and develop, shaping the market. So for me, it's that's the bit that you should be defined in terms of transformation and evolution, is how are we going to best allow patients to get this medicine? So once you think about that, then it depends on the type of product you're using, whether it's a rare disease, whether it's a specialty medicine, which has like a gene therapy, let's say, or cell and gene products, which have really complex, not just patient pathways, but supply chains and procurement pathway, storage, all of these little things that where medical is actually uniquely placed to interact with all of these different functions. So for example, I've been involved in supply chain discussions around medicines, right? Which I didn't expect to ever be involved in as a physician and a medic, but you're talking about continuity of care and that type of piece. So you're really advocating from that perspective, right the way through to when we launched the gene therapy. You're looking at making sure storage and supply and all of the cold chain is all under control, so that once this is taken out of its storage and refrigeration, it's ready to go in the patient. So you really need to understand that patient pathway. And medical affairs can work with regulatory, supply, safety, market access, patient access, HOR, to sort of develop this holistic launch model. And you'll notice I didn't mention marketing, but obviously medical marketing is a huge part of what we do. But I think it's in these specialty medicines less and less important. So that's really how I would look at it. I'd rather than sort of say transformation to be a strategic driver is the goal. It's more about the outcome that you're trying to achieve with this transformation, right? So it's more about that on the ground outcome, and then from there building it up to say, actually, we do need med affairs as a key partner in what we're doing, rather than a service offering. And you're also seeing now with a bit of recognition, as you look at newer operating models where you think about companies like Roche and other companies that are going to more of a kind of a product strategy approach rather than a pure functional marketing, medical access type of approach. You have a broader remit within strategy, and then the individual specialist functions coming in and executing where needed. So that's where, again, where medical affairs should have quite a big say in terms of those touch points across different functions. So I'd always look at it as, what are we trying to achieve, rather than let's change up what we're doing to be, I don't know, transform or evolve.
Great. I mean, obviously that gives me the very, very first takeaway for this, that objective of the transformation is central to the theme. And if I was to talk about strategy, which you touched upon, and if I was to answer that question myself, I mean, there are two pieces where I see my role as in the current business as it is operating business as usual, and in the future and long term. So when I say current and near term, so the way I work and the way my work is structured, I look at, when I say current business, I'm looking at now up to say 5 years, and the future strategy is looking out way out into the future beyond the 5 years and contributing to that strategy. And patient pathways, patient journeys, disease journeys, everything leading to what we do. And execution also brings in the question of, or the important piece that we contribute a value to, is the pre-launch. I mean, it starts before anyone in the organization can talk. We start doing the work that we do on the ground with the KOLs. So Santosh, I saw that you had your hand up for a minute. So over to you if you have to add anything to this.
Thanks, Bhavesh. I think great points from Mayur. I just wanted specifically, since we are representing two different or sets of organization, multinationals and branded generics, and to that question, I think what is happening, the multinational R&D is working more towards the unaddressed, unmet medical needs, and the R&D is completely moving towards that. And that is how their strategies and focus areas are coming up, and all the points what Mayur mentioned, is totally reflective of that. Now, when we look at the branded generics, right? Now, this is my personal view. I believe that there is a huge disconnect worldwide, especially in countries like us, in India, where the government priorities are community-based, and the disease epidemiological burden challenges for the government is very different in volumes as compared to what the entire R&D shift is happening, which is very much, as I mentioned, areas where unmet needs are high. And that is where this disconnect is. And when we look at this disconnect, this is how these two different organizations try to address it in many of its own ways, and they are all contributing. So now going back to specific question, how in branded generics we are seeing this shift as well. Maybe be it marketing, but there is biosimilar trends where quite a lot of inputs. I'm sure Dr. Reddy's, for example, is so much into biosimilars. Quite a lot of interface begins. So entire trend, is also catching up with all these companies. So it would be fair to say that that even in branded generics, right, the involvement of medical is nowadays we are seeing starting right at the time of the early studies like phase 2, phase 3, especially when we go for the biosimilars aspect. I hope it addresses that your topic.
No, I agree what you're saying. And in fact, just to enlighten the crowd, the involvement is at the very beginning, and the structuring of work I don't see much different from MNCs, and I've straddled both the worlds, and fortunately for me, successfully at least managed to deliver what I was expected to deliver via my teams. But if I look at it, the part of the time that you spend, I mean, it is not the reactive function that it was even in the branded generic world. And much as we say, given the realities on the ground, if you look around you, if you look at the Indian space, the ecosystem, it's the branded generics and the Indian companies that are ruling the roost at the moment, given the state of affairs in the external world, in the external environment. And when you look at it, I know size of the team is just a surrogate marker, but it definitely is a marker of the importance paid to medical affairs and the expectations thereof from medical affairs. And if I tell you, whether it's in licensing partnerships or whether I look at the first to launch biosimilar that we're looking at when I'm thinking of LOE, or when I'm looking at the current molecules and looking at innovation and say 10 years from now, I have teams which are looking at innovation on disease management platforms, DMPs, as we speak. We are expending a few 100 crores just to be ready, future ready. So I know this is not an exception. There are a lot of companies which are trying to be future ready, yet in the branded generic space are all doing it purely from a point of better management of diseases. And who better to hone the strategy than being a partner in the whole thing? And the other thing that you mentioned, and the other thing that was discussed was having brand teams, right? The brand teams essentially, rather than just a marketing person doing it, brand teams are holistics these days. And it is the brand team has a medical partner in it who's equally, while being a part of the function. So it's not the function separately thinking in silos. But this journey had started for me approximately 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, way back in time when I was in, I think I was back then in AstraZeneca, and we had brand teams particularly dedicated to brands and thinking, not brand, but again, to Mayur's point, thinking of the objective, what are we setting out to achieve? And to achieve things like, I mean, lofty ambitions like we want to ensure that diabetes is properly managed in India, or patients should have better outcomes when they have ACS, acute coronary syndrome. Starting backwards from there, do we have solutions to address it? Then working backwards and coming and the planning phase. So I think that probably takes care of that question. Moving on to transformation. Now, transformation, for whatever reasons, we've discussed the objectives and we've discussed in what direction it goes in. What are the key elements, Santosh, if I may address this question to you, key elements of a successful transformation roadmap, if you were to look at it and if you were to implement a successful transformation within your own teams?
Very difficult
one. I know, but
yeah. Yeah. Look, I think first of all, we really have to acknowledge the need of the business. Where is the business going? You know, what the challenges it poses, and with that, what opportunities exist. And according to that, you know, change comes, be it in terms of focus, be it in terms of reorganization, restructuring, etc. So we need to really understand the why behind this, which is predominantly driven with business. So that why has to be understood. Second is, once we have understood the why, the second is to really understand the narrative well in depth, and then trying to communicate it to whosoever you are dealing with, you know, downstream or upstream, in the same way. So it begins with the belief system. Why? Because there would be a better tomorrow. That's the quest of human evolution. That's the quest of even business evolution. So I would suggest that is the first fundamental from my perspective. Of course, you know, we will have to acknowledge change. You know, I think I would be very surprised if anybody says that I have never heard any conversation on change where it is being said that you should accept change and you should embrace and you should walk with it. So that is another aspect. A lot within this has to be dealt when realizing this change or transformation with a lot of empathy, a lot of compassion. And that I always believe is the key fundamental, which means that assuming today for some reason medical is in the spotlight, that shouldn't make us high-headed. That shouldn't make us, you know, kind of mavericks that, oh, you know what, everybody is dependent on us. No, we are one stakeholder which is addressing to multi-stakeholders and are in that omnipresent environment where all of us are equally contributing. And at that particular time, it is important for us not just understand what we do, but we have to also understand what others are doing and what the requirements are, and try to manage to meet these needs by embracing empathy, compassion, and then delivering onto the objectives. So I would say mostly my answers are from soft skills perspective rather than hard skills perspective, but you know, I will let the flow decide.
Good. I mean, I fully agree with you that transformation is a very difficult process and change management. And unless you pay heed to the softer side of it, you're likely to lose people than to succeed in the endeavor. Moving on, cognizant of the time here, hence I want to move on and address as many questions as possible. Mayur, field medical affairs. I touched upon it in the context at the outset, that while it has been a function, it was, as I said, fledgling to start off with, and it had a very, very specific, narrow role in pre-launch, especially with new chemical entities and new biological entities. But that has also transformed over the years. And I know you touched upon the stakeholder part of it, but you've seen the transformation in field medical affairs. So what has been the journey for field medical affairs in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, field medical affairs hugely important. You know, the MSL role or whatever it's called in the various companies. The field med affairs person is the customer facing or HCP or stakeholder facing individual in the organization, right? Which is, and it's really important whether you're working on more simple products or specialty platforms. Really, what I've seen is we've gone from MSLs and field medical teams that are largely data dumpers, as it were. Here's our information, have it, to really building strategic partnerships, whether it's for research, whether it's for access, local access, working with access teams, whether it's for formulary submissions, things like that. So we find that I found that the field medical team is extremely useful in terms of that exchange. So they bring in the insights, and we know that this is really a key for us when we're building strategies, tweaking strategies. The difficulty is, of course, collating all of that information, right? So you get all of these insights. How do you pull that all together and then pull out all the key ones which are going to then impact your strategy? So that's more about how you operationalize these things. But the field medical team that the teams that I've worked with have gone from these very sort of one-way, here's a presentation deck on our data or our mechanism of action or whatever, to really driving our strategic narrative, becoming more storytellers, building relationships with physicians, understanding the needs in the local market, evidence needs, innovative evidence needs, not just here's the randomized controlled trial data, but in local outcomes data, local health impact data. So, clinic resource utilization, things like that. These are the kinds of areas that we've worked with, and that's why, to a certain extent, in some companies, you're seeing a reduction in traditional sales staff, an increase in medical staff, because actually these strategic partnerships, the way we partner and generate evidence and generate the right types of materials and information at a local level, is what is actually providing value to the system and to physicians. So for me, it's a much more elaborate skill set now within MSL teams. We train up not just the science, but also the sort of storytelling aspects of things, really understanding how to pick and choose the right messages, how to really segment as well the HCPs that or even other stakeholders that you're working with, in terms of the types of information they need, the channels that they need to be communicated with. And this is really important. So this is really important aspects that the MSL brings into the organization as well. So then they're part of your sort of omni-channel strategy, let's say. They are one channel, but when you look at every single survey that I've ever seen, the MSL is always rated 1 or 2 in terms of the value that they bring across every potential channel that a pharmaceutical organization has. So we've had to, over the years, I've worked in teams where we've had to kind of upskill teams. You can't just sort of replace everyone if they don't have the skill set. It's not possible. So you upskill teams on some of those softer skills, so it becomes more of an exchange, more of a partnership. And they naturally come because of the competition. You're always looking for PhDs, you're looking for high science individuals, that kind of thing. So the science is always there. It's whether they can evolve the brains and the thinking to become these real partners in the field. So that's what I've seen and personally been involved with as well. Although I've never been an MSL myself, so I can't talk specifically from experience. But yeah, absolutely key drivers of what we want to be doing in medical affairs.
So no, Mayur, I agree with you. I've never been an MSL myself, but I benefited from going out into the field and working with the MSLs and doing as much as possible on every sort of defined frequency. So maybe monthly, but learned a lot along the way. And the conversation comes to my mind. I was talking to Jonathan Hunt, who was then a finance guy from AstraZeneca, who then, as a part of his sort of lateral move, was looking after Austria and India as the country head. And he told me that I want you to transform this function. It was a one-line narrative that he said. But then I told him, where is this coming from? Because I was new in the organization. And this is important for the MSLs who are sitting here today attending, or who are MSL managers. And he said, I come from an investment banking background, and it takes between 5 and 10 years before we are let loose in front of important customers, right? We need to develop the level of maturity. Knowledge, we're fresh from the oven. He used that term, freshly baked. We are bristling with knowledge, but it takes a long time before we're let loose in front of customers, because there is a skill set that is required. And investment banking sort of, so here he said, it looks after an important part of your life, the money. And here he turned around to me and said, you guys look after life. We are in healthcare. So it is all the more a sort of a bigger imperative that we ensure that the people who are out there have the right skill sets. And he said, I'm leaving it to you. Now, we looked at various components, me with my medical director back then, Amar Raza. And I mean, we looked at pieces like inciting. So even bringing that information back into the organization and understanding what was happening outside. So, I mean, the difference between data, information, knowledge, insights, and wisdom is something that we took our MSLs on. That was one journey. The second journey you clearly pointed out was storytelling. It's not just about, this is the piece of information and I'm leaving it with you. Anyone could do that. The third was not just a data dump, despite the storytelling, making it clinically relevant for the doctor. So what? Because a p-value is not going to walk into my clinic, whether it's significant or not. A disease is not walking into my clinic. A patient is walking into my clinic. And the single most, and this is my coinage, the single most important unit of healthcare delivery is that conversation between the doctor and the patient. And then the whole world revolves around that to make the right thing happen. So effectively, what we need to do is make these conversations even more enriching and adding value to the doctor. And that is why they would listen. And it then takes me to the why. I mean, when Jonathan told me transform, and he said, I want the skill sets to be different. And we worked on that journey, and we worked on many pieces of the skill sets, many parts of the journey, from inciting to even conversations later on in the journey. And as you correctly said, you can't replace the entire team, but you can upskill the team. And dealing with payers, in our case, it was not so much the HTAs that we needed to do the HEORs, but the conversations with, say, the bigger institutes, and sort of being able to convey value which they understand, which payers understand, was one of the skill sets that additionally we had to develop apart from inciting, apart from converting from a simple data dump to a clinically relevant conversation. And there comes the other piece of peer-to-peer, the ability to hold conversations with the experts on a peer-to-peer level. And that addressed what Jonathan was telling me, that before you let loose in front of a customer, they need to be at that level.
Yeah, that peer piece is something that I find a lot, right? Because you find this reverence and respect for the clinical, so for the physician, they're the clinical expert, they see patients on a day-to-day. But
Yeah.
where I explain to my medical teams, it is a peer-to-peer conversation, because my teams, you are experts in the product, okay? You're experts in its development, in its science, in its safety, in its efficacy, and all of that. So that's where this peer-to-peer piece comes in. And that's why it's a partnership, because the physician should be prescribing from a position of awareness, like they're fully informed, so they understand then who's the best patient at what time, etc. So we always talk about right patient, right time, right? So right medicine, right patient, right time. And that's where this peer-to-peer piece comes in. And so you start to, if you think that way, then you sort of start to have much more insightful conversations. Whilst again, a bit of an old school attitude, which I think you also see in the sales guys, is they're the physician, they know best. Well, actually, no, I know my product well enough to have a really, truly impactful conversation. We can co-develop strategies for optimizing care and all the other things that come out of it. But yeah, you're right. You have to start from that peer-to-peer position. Otherwise, you end up with, well, you're just providing, you're just kind of a source of information instead of a true partner.
Exactly. So wonderful. I would sort of, rather than go through the questions that I thought would be important, I do want to address what people are talking about. And there are some questions in the box. So I'd go to the first one, and Santosh, I'll come to you with that. Guru has this question for us. Over the past 10 years, there's an emergence of granular, easily available RWE platforms compared to, and we all agree with that. And he's saying that the need from payers and clinicians is also increasing for such kind of data. We also know that the regulators are going to allow RWEs to be used instead of the standard clinical trials that were used, the randomized clinical trials. So newer avenues to quick, meaningful data have become more important as a deliverable. Do you think, I know there is something in there which also troubles me when I look at it. Do you think we are equipped to deal with this as an integral part of our work that we do, using real world evidence and the newer sort of data generation, but the meaningful data generation platforms, and incorporating that as an additional skill set, adding value, to the commercial part of the organization, but more importantly, answering the questions that the clinicians might have, the regulators might have, the payers might have. So all stakeholders. Thoughts, please.
This question is to me, right, Bhavesh?
Yes, Santosh.
Thank you. I have my thoughts around RWE. There is no denial that RWE is very, very important, very critical. But that just doesn't solve the problem. The real aspect of it is the timing of the RWE. When do we need to have it? I am seeing these days, many medics are investing into RWEs just because they want to do RWE. Is it wrong? No. Is it right? Probably, because as Bhavesh, to your question, are we equipped? I won't comment on Europe and US. There I feel we are equipped, but in our part of the world, I don't think so we are equipped. But we have to make a start somewhere. And that is why, I personally can give a discount on the timing aspect. So fair enough, just get started, because it is all about the capabilities. It is all about the mindset. I have seen most of the medics internally, externally, during industry collaborations, they find it kind of pretty easy tilt towards the commercial aspect of storytelling rather than, the RWE aspects, because an RWE is a long-term project. It takes time. You cannot do it, in 3 months, 6 months. Of course, retrospective analysis of the data sets are good, you can, but usually on an average, it would be fair to assume 2 to 3 years we should have in hand. And within 2 to 3 years, because we're talking about transformation, organization change, focus change, structures change, people change, management change, and they cannot demonstrate the good work that they have been doing. So from that particular perspective, while we are not equipped in terms of infrastructure, we are also not equipped from the mindset point of view to embrace these type of change, these challenges, and force ourselves that, hey, this is the reality. But nonetheless, rather than investing all the time or 80% of my money into physician education or events, etc., I would try to decrease it a little bit there and try to shift it a little bit here. So this again goes back into the entire brand planning exercise. And that actually relates to what's the mindset of the team. If you look at the needs of the market, needs of the business, RW is always needed. But what's the mindset of the brand team, and how management leaders are driving towards that, not as to manage the trend, but as to really address the questions at the right time.
Okay. So, you mentioned mindset and in relevance to the RWE and very specific niche question. Mayur, we had spoken about when we met earlier, when we talked about making a shift, and we agreed that it's about a mindset shift. And not just RWE, given your experience at sort of the global level and having led transformation in your own organization at Novartis, how do we bring about this mindset shift to position within the medical organization where we're going to head? Second, within the larger, and I see there's somebody who's already asked about C-suite, but rather than, I would say, making the medical function a strategic driver for various aspects of the value chain. So in both the mindset shift within the organization that you lead and you've led in the past and currently leading, and with the organization at large.
Yeah, I think it starts always starts with a very clear vision and strategy and communicating that. Okay, I think there's with all of these things, a lot of work goes into actually what, we talked about objective, right? That is related as well. Why are we doing this? It's the why of it, and the clear vision, and how it relates to a purpose, right? People don't get up in the morning and say, right, today I'm going to go out and drive revenue for my business. Certainly not in the medical organization, maybe in sales because you're bonused on it and things like that, but not in medical. You don't wake up in the morning and go, right, I need to work out how to do this, generate more sales. You get up in the morning because you believe you're having impact. You believe you're having a positive impact for patients. Even when you're working on a product with a safety alert, which is what I did. I got up in the morning because I knew that the work that I was doing was to help patients not experience that safety issue, and maybe we're managing them better. So you start off with that, a purpose-driven, clear vision and strategy. Then it's about clear communication, right? Which will help to drive a cultural change. So these are the things that you need to continue to communicate, and you need to have an understanding of like how you're implementing. So for example, just a very, very quick example, you either, if you're doing let's say you're doing a restructure of your organization, and with it comes operational changes, let's say, you either say, this is what we're going to do, this is how it's going to happen, and this is done, right? And then over the next 6 months, we're going to implement. Or you say, this is what we want to achieve, this is what we want to do, but we're going to do it with you. And both of them are going to have people who don't like it or do like it. But you need to sort of do one or the other, right? You can't sort of have this halfway house of, we've decided what we want to do, we're not really going to tell you it, we're just going to drip feed it out every few weeks, right? So, which I've been involved in a transformation like that. So it's clear communication, and that's how you sort of build up that trust, build trust in your vision and your strategy, because you're being transparent, you're explaining the why of it all. And I think that's just where it all starts. Then when you operationalize it, it depends on exactly the objective. And a lot of the time, I was involved in another transformation where the operating model was supposed to mirror the access environment, right? And without going to details of it, essentially the new structure mirrored the access environment, but ultimately the capability sets in-house didn't match. And this is where perhaps that transformation didn't work out, because you've thought about what you want to do, you've thought about your vision, but then you haven't actually executed on that, because you've just tried to get everyone in who was in the old structure into the new one. So this comes down to capabilities and skill sets. So now you're talking about, as you're implementing your transformation, you're training, you're increasing your skill sets. You may be hiring from outside, which again will cause consternation with your internal group. But if you need to have capability enhancements, you might need to do that. And then, it's continued stakeholder engagement. It's continued emphasis of the value proposition, and an understanding that actually a lot of the time, you want to innovate, but you also want to make sure you're covering the basics, right? So this is another thing that happens, because you get different leaders over time who want to do things differently, implement new things. You almost have a mishmash of lots of innovative things, and you almost forget the basics. And again, you kind of want to bring that back in and consolidate. Actually, these are the key areas. So, those are the kinds of things that I would be thinking about when I'm communicating. And it always comes down to that value proposition and how you're communicating. And we know the whole marketing, you need to land a message 10 times before it really sticks, right? And and that's not just in pharma, that's just generally, it's the same with all of us, right? So it's the same message. So that's why you need right from the beginning, a clear vision, clear objective, and a clear purpose. And then it just comes from that over time.
Good. Santosh, coming back to you. If you were to look at this newer set of skills, capabilities, competencies, whatever you want to call them, what are the most important ones, given you've been a part of transformation for long? So one, what are the skills, competencies, capabilities expected of medical affairs professionals to deliver in the new model, the transformation that's happening as we speak? Already, a lot of transformation has been underway. Second, what are the skills and competencies that are critical for leaders to lead this change? So 2 questions there.
Thanks, Bhavesh. Great
Don't
question.
look so flummoxed, Santosh. You led change yourself, and I'm aware of that.
No, your question is so good, and the reality is, whatever I may answer, we all struggle with that, in terms
Yeah.
of getting the perfect match. So I'm reflecting on the real aspects what we are doing, and what we are seeing these days. Um, Depends, as you said, for leaders and for medical experts. When it comes to the expertise area, first is there is no compromise on expertise in the disease and the data. That is the hygiene factor. Once that has been done, then I remember, Bhavesh, you mentioned during one of your questions earlier, the art of storytelling. And that's where the rubber hits the ground. We being so much expert in science, we believe in detailed conversation. Now that works, but that works in different setups. But in most of the setups, how do you simplify this whole complex understanding and have that art of narration? That's pretty much important. I think this storytelling applies to everybody. It doesn't matter leader or an individual contributor. That's the second aspect. Third is, given like Mayur mentioned earlier, there are so many areas medical has its tentacles inserted. It all boils down to people management, and how from soft skills aspects you are able to manage your stakeholders. You're able to communicate what is expected out of you, or even when you are saying no, how nicely or how well you package that and do it. So again, that soft skills aspect plays a very important role. So this, I would suggest, is from a predominantly individual contributor. From the leadership point of view, I have strong opinion here. I think the first foremost important aspect is the leader must have the will to drive it. I see sometimes, not always, but sometimes leaders struggling with the will because they dwindle many times if their fundamentals are not strong, either towards the R&D side or towards the business side. The balance towards the prioritization and the will to make it happen by taking everybody along, not pleasing anybody. And many times we get into that circuit of pleasing people, and that is when we try to become please people. We get popular, but popularity doesn't last for long. We are looking for credibility. Credibility comes with the hardcore facts in the right way, and things which are consistently done in the right manner. So that is something I believe leaders must have. It's, for me, is kind of non-negotiable. And then the other aspects of not just managing upwards, but equally paying attention downstreams as well. I have seen leaders who pay a lot of attention downstream, and then they manage to follow the up management, and that is when again the problem comes. And I have seen people who really are so much busy managing upstream, they do not have much visibility to the granularity. And at that particular point, it is important to build that balance as well. So in the interest of time, I will, it's again a long topic, right? I will just reserve the answer to this matter.
But Santosh, if you were to look at your journey or other medical advisors, say 10, 15 years ago, and the work that we are doing today, you see a lot of differences, right? I mean, what we were doing 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So I'm just going to list out a few things that we were probably not a part of, but are part of today. One is strategy, whether it's near term, future term, an ability to think strategy. So we're not just saying, I know the pharmacology of these drugs, therefore I deserve to be doing this job. First and foremost, it's about certain skills, capabilities, competencies that is now defined very well in the framework of capabilities. So a strategic mindset, an ability to think and develop plans, capabilities to insight, capabilities to sort of communicate, not just the storytelling part, apart from a data dump, turning it into a storytelling, but to communicate value, to be able to fish out value, to communicate value, an ability to draw patient pathways, an ability to be a partner. I mean, one of the big things, I spoke about this, an ability to partner with the clinical development organization. So medical clinical partnership, as it was called, or medical and development partnerships. And in many organizations, in a couple of organizations where I've worked, the medical affairs is essentially a part of the R&D organization, the development part of the R&D organization. The business acumen that you need to have, because you're adding value to a business, understanding business. I'm therefore, as Mayur said, not saying that I get up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to add another few million to this business, or I'm going to get this sale. That's not my job. But what I do, if I understand business more clearly, and recently I've taken my team through, at least my leadership team, through a basics of corporate finance, which I've had the good opportunity of learning many, many years ago, eons ago. But I took them through that so that they know what they're contributing to. It's not their job to go out and get sales, but in the hard bits that are tangible, that I can address, I can think of these and a few more. That was what I was meaning by the team, but I'm sure you agree with those, correct?
Yeah, of course, skills are skills, competencies are competencies. I believe skills help you gain the competency, and sometimes it is vice versa as well. Of course, what all the, in each organizations, we have different competency skills, but of course, the top ones, already highlighted by you, Mayur did mention in terms of understanding why, the strategic fit, then, how do you package it, communicate it, to what level, what kind of conversation you need to do peer to peer, all this we actually covered. So, so of course, these, I fully agree with what you mentioned. There is no denying that.
And not taking away from the very important aspect that you brought about at a leadership level, what you need to do to ensure that the change is successful and you don't end up alienating either the management or your team, and you don't end up having to recruit a full new team or find yourself out of the job because somebody else will lead that change for you. I mean, Mayur, that brings me down to another point. That
sorry, Bhavish, apologies. Can I add one more point as an afterthought?
Yeah, please.
Within that, as you said, communication, we did talk about the storytelling, but how do you communicate, keep engaging with your stakeholders and keep those channels always open. And I think Mayur did mention, from marketing messaging point of as well, that it's not one time, you have to do it again. I think same philosophy applies even with any change management. So apology.
No, it is correct, because it's a very important point. I mean, it's a known fact, rule of thumb, that it takes 16 exposures for a brand to stick in a customer's mind, right? So likewise, it requires a repeated communication, and it requires the consistency, and the leader has to be seen to be sticking out through the transformation. But that takes me, I'm very cognizant of the time. Mayur, we have to operate in a lot of ambiguity, right? There's no clarity of what is happening. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's difficult. It is difficult, right? Having been in an organization, well, lived through several transformations, I think the key is to stay curious and ask questions, and really focus on, in the moment, what are you doing? How can you continue to excel in your role and have impact? But also ask those questions so you understand as much as possible what the new world will look like after any evolution or transformation. But it's really difficult, because you're also relying on leaders who do the kinds of things that we've already said, right? Clear strategy, clear vision. You need that. And when you don't have that, when you don't have this consistency of communication, which then reveals a lack of or reveals an inconsistency of thought, then you start to lose an organization. So you need both sides to be working well, right? You need to have the clear communication, clear vision. And for me personally, I believe in a real, like I said earlier, purpose-driven communication from the top. And then at the sort of people who are involved in, but not actually leading the transformation, you lead within role. You lead where you can lead. You advocate for your teams if you're a manager, perhaps. You ask questions that maybe other people don't want to ask, and you do it in a constructive way. I've learned my own lessons over time where I've challenged and asked questions perhaps not in the right way, but you've got to do that, but you do it from, as long as you're doing it from a position of kind of curiosity and good intent, then I think that's the way to keep engaged with it and to keep continuing what you're doing in role. And as we mentioned earlier, we're not, most of us, I would have thought, aren't in this just simply to pay the bills, right? The type of roles that we're in, where we're really impacting patient lives, genuinely we are, then there's a wider responsibility as well. So we will all, I'm sure everyone on this call would be taking that into account. But I think it's I have to admit, I have in my time found it extremely difficult to keep calm and engaged, right? Sometimes it's very difficult because you get inconsistent messages. You don't necessarily that don't align with your principles, or maybe the reason why you joined the organization. So then, and in those situations, you need to take stock. You need to understand actually what is it. Maybe the transformation results in a misalignment of values or misalignment of direction. And I can certainly talk about transformations where I've been involved in, and that's been true. And then I've moved on, and that's part of the thought process as well, right? This is why, again, you lead. You don't follow people because they're changing things. You follow people for their kind of purpose, what their what the future holds, right? The vision of the future that they're giving you. And if that vision doesn't align with what you want, then again, these are times to take stock and understand actually maybe there's a different part of the world that you need to be in. So it's all about, it's asking questions of yourself, of the organization, of your teams, and then also supporting, again, yourself, your teams, and the organization in terms of the impact on patients. That's how I would approach sort of these ambiguous environments that you end up in when organizations restructure and transform.
I sort of resounding agreement with you, and I've been part of a few transformations, and more than once, at least once that I can recall, and sort of very openly so, when eventually it did not agree with the set of values or beliefs that I had. You tend to ask those questions which are important for you to find the answers to, and if you don't, then yes, it's time to move on and find something that aligns with. So I think given the time is now almost up, I would sort of try and summarize the key takeaways that I personally took from this conversation. Thank you, gentlemen, for being patient with me and having this conversation with me. But the first and foremost, the point that comes to me is understanding the real objective and sort of envisioning it of the transformation, sort of looking at the end state and at least why we are going there, and try to form at least some kind of a picture of the end state. Also, as leaders, the ability to communicate this change and get a buy-in across the organization, which is the first key step. So the real objective, seeing where we are leading it, and ability to communicate it effectively. Then transformation, my point number 2 is, I'm taking it from the last one that we just talked about, is it will be successful if people who are leading the transformation and then people who are in the transformation would have a capability of working in the gray zone. So dealing with ambiguity, having some amount of clarity, but not full clarity, but yet being able to not just work, but being able to excel at work, and being curious and asking the questions to get more clarity as and when they feel the need. And the third one is fundamental to transformation, is having people who have or are open to and who have the ability to learn new skills rather than keep questioning, why should I? So open to learning and saying, okay, this is the future and this is what future looks like, and I want to be future ready, so I'm ready to learn the new skills. So these are the 3 top takeaways that come to my mind. I hope that sums up our conversation well. Yep.
Yeah, I just want to add, Bhavesh, especially thank you very much. Mayur has brought that point elegantly multiple times. The purpose, we should be purpose driven, and we cannot lose line of sight on that. With that, gentlemen, I have to dial off. It has been a pleasure being on the floor with all of you, and thank you everyone spending time with us. All the best. Take care.
Thanks, Santosh. Over to you, Vinit.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Santosh, for joining. What a really insightful discussion. 60 minutes literally just fly. So I would like to sincerely extend my thanks to Dr. Bhavesh for driving such a laser-sharp discussions around the medical affairs transformation. Personally, for me, the transformation, I think the discussion, overall discussion, we have not only spoken about the transformation within as a company, as a medical affairs, but also we touched upon the transformation as a person, as a medical advice professional. I think that's something has a huge impact on me. A big thanks to our panelists, Dr. Mayur and Dr. Santosh, for sharing their insights and thought-provoking discussions, which really greatly enriched the session and provided the immense value to the audience. On behalf of Medical Affairs Society, I would like to thank our audience who joined here in Zoom or also LinkedIn Live. And thank you once again for your invaluable participation and being the integral part of the success of Medical Affairs Society events. Thank you so much. We're signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.